Hello, hello! Today you're watching me take apart and put back together this amazing Waltham watch from what has to be my guess, about the 1950s. And I'm just here doing what I love. And a passion actually came from me watching others do the same here on YouTube. So without further ado, let's see what we can do about this. It's in pretty poor shape, the case over here. The case back is relatively easy to come off. At some point we're going to have to do a greater restoration on this and maybe change out the broken glass. You can see it's broken in two parts over here. But here's the back off. You can see this beautiful AS 1187/94 movement. This is actually used in a lot of watches in the time. Talk about that in just a second. But first, let's put it on the time grapher. And things are no good, So we'll just kind of figure out what's going on over here. I'm going to start off by taking the crown out of the case. And what makes it nice and tricky is, of course, these tabs for this outer space ring that's right in the way, of course. Get that little screw. Take my nice little cushion over here. Flip this over. Give it a good tap on the top. And here comes the case off from the rest of the watch. We're just going to put the crown back in over here. Tighten it back up. And right now I'm just aligning the hands just so we can take them off of the dial. And being extra cautious over here, we're using a plastic and as well as a dial cover. And I've seen a lot of content about watchmaking from YouTube, and whether you like watches or not, or have you seen this type of video or not before, when I started off seeing this type of stuff, I just thought it was super interesting. It's just really, really interesting to see something from so long ago. I mean, if this is from the 50s, we're talking about 75 years or about there. And watches are truly interesting. They're one of the only things that were made to be brought back to life, be serviced, and to outlive us all if taken care of properly. So hopefully we can do the same over here. And we're just going to let the power down. Pretty easy movement we're working on today. There's nothing special about this. This is a manual wind, and there's no date complication on the front, on the dial side rather. This is just super easy. And actually a movement that was used in a lot of watches in the time. Waltham using this movement is really, really interesting because the Blancpain that they did, the version of it, was actually the same movement. It's just an AS 1187. It was used in a lot of 1950s watches, and it does have the Inca block shock protection system on it, which is really, really nice, easy to service, if you will. So this is a really good starter watch for someone that's trying to get into this kind of stuff. And actually down the line, I'd really like to restore my grandma's watch, which I think it has the same movement. I got to check, but you might see another one of these a little bit later down the line. And so right here, we're just moving the train bridge out the way. Really easy stuff. There's just 3 screws that hold this down. And here it goes, right off the top. And we will inspect these pieces in just a minute, just greater than we're doing right over here. But here I'm just making sure that the second hand is pretty much straight, because that is a very easy thing to bend. I'm going to take off the center wheel bridge, I guess you could call it. Just popping that off right over here. And one of the things I noticed about this movement is the tolerances are actually really tight. Um, that's not the case for a lot of movements. When it's like hard to get the bridges off, especially this pallet fork bridge that we're about to remove over here. Super tight. Obviously I'm cutting this video down so you guys are getting the abridged version, but some of these things were not so easy to remove or put back together. And so the center wheel is not going to come out, and we cannot proceed any further until we get that nice click for the canyon pinion out the way. And boom, here's the center wheel that just drops out the other side. And a lot of flipping over like a pancake over here on the main board. But now we get to take apart the mainspring bridge. Three screws. And that goes that. And you can just see already like how dirty certain parts of this watch were. Although I think when we inspect a little bit later, we're going to see some fresh oil on some parts. So whether this was improperly serviced before I picked it up on eBay, for the sumly price of I think around $30, by the way, we'll figure this out. And what I like to do right there is I really like to loosen the screws for this. Put a piece of Rodico, make sure that it's got the spring part that's disengaged, and then we can take out the rest so it doesn't go flying. And same thing for the spring over here. You really do want to put Rodico or something on top over here so this does not go away from the desk. And here we're just taking apart the crown wheels, and there you go. They're kind of stuck together, also a sign of, I don't know, old plus new, I don't know. And here we have just the main plate left. And we're probably going to start our inspection once I stop flipping this over. There we go. All right, so let's see. We can see this jewel doesn't look all that dirty, but the next one over looks pretty toasted, pretty bad. And that's just dried oil, or old oil. And in the mainspring, interestingly enough, there's just a ton of oil just sitting in the bottom over there. Sometimes that could be common for eBay watches that have been tried to be serviced, or someone really tried to get something running. There was also a mark with a big X on the mainspring, like where the mainspring sits. So I don't know if someone decided this was their day to, take this apart and just fill it with oil or not, but it does look like there's a little bit of over oiling, as you can see on the train wheel bridge over there. So now we're just going to inspect each piece. All fine besides dirty pivots. That also looks good. Doesn't look like it's broken or anything. Here's the center wheel. It's not especially look like it's out of sort. And this to me looks a little bit bent looking up close, but I think it's fine. And I did kind of bend it back just a tad bit off camera. The balance looks great. Nothing wrong with the balance. And so then we get to start our cleaning process over here. And I do a pre-clean in IPA. And this is 91%. It's not, 70%. I think that's a little bit too less. But this is not naphtha or anything like that. I'm a little bit afraid of some of the chemicals and good ventilation. So nothing fancy about me. I am just a hobbyist and kind of just getting my feet wet with things. So what I do is I do put this in IPA, and I do a pre-clean pretty toughly upon myself to make sure I'm scrubbing this, that, and the other. And toughly, if that's a word, it is today. And after that, I do use the baskets and also put it in IPA. Nothing crazy. That's going in a ultrasonic cleaner, not some fancy machine that you see these other guys use on YouTube. And so here is part of the trickiest parts. We're going to reinstall the balance just to take out the cap jewels. And this is also, this is done in one dip. And I'm sure you guys have seen this 1,000 times if you're seeing this on other YouTube channels or something like that. I cut out most of it, but let me tell you, this is probably the third or fourth time I was putting this back together on the top jewel. It sucks when you miss it and, you know, things are not exactly lining up. But it's no problem. You just do it again. You know, this is a hobby about patience for sure. And you can see we drop it in and didn't get lucky. It didn't go straight on the top, but just a little small adjustment to that, and it's fine. We close the gate, and I really do like to use just a little piece of Rodico on the top just in case that gate's going to float away. I did have one spring away once, and I got really lucky and found it underneath the table, but it's just not something I like to do. So gently holding in with Rodico, you can see how I snap this back in. So now we're just going to turn our attention to the bottom jewel, same process. Equally tough. I like to do this when the watch is all not together. As you can see, it is good practice to just make sure that you get this stuff clean and that the balance is moving freely. That's just like the way I like to do it. I know other people do it when everything's all together and they're just doing final assembly. Maybe that's better. I'm not really sure. But this is just the way I like to do it. I like to make sure that the least amount of components there possible is what I have the ability to ruin, really. And so now we're just putting a dot of 9010 on the jewel right over here, and that's a really good dot. Really proud of that one. And ever so slightly putting this back together. Giving it a little good love tap for good luck. Putting this back in the watch. And I don't know if you noticed, maybe you got to go back 5 seconds or so, but the gate was actually closed in the time that I did that, the little brass gate. So always make sure that it's open before you go and put a jewel in, because that's a really good way to knock the gate off. And I'm sure there's nothing more annoying in the world than redoing this gate. So not something on the to-do list today if I don't have to do it. And one part of the spring at a time, we're just getting this back in. You know, in the beginning, I was really worried about stuff like this. Over time, your comfort level just gets to you after doing it for a little while. And it's not like I've been doing this forever. I've been taking apart watches pretty much for, I'd like to say, a year now. You know, it is a big challenge to do it on camera. I'm not going to lie to you guys. It is really fun to show you the process that I'm going through, and especially if this video is helping someone else rebuild the same like movement. That's really why I'm doing this, because that's how I started. You know, it's the same thing. Well, let me just mention in 1 second. I really like to put the tweezers back into the little hole over there just so it's lined up. But again, going to my main point, that is how I started off doing this stuff, is just watching the varied movements that I had on someone that did it already on YouTube. So I thought I'd add to the repository, if you will. So now we're just, with all those cap jewels back in, you know, we're just making sure that the balance is running freely. And it is. It's great when you see it spin like that and with a seemingly endless stop. That means that I feel like you did like both the balance jewels well, in my opinion. And we're going to demount the balance. We'll stick this back in the watch a little bit later. You may notice it says WXO on it. That is a matching balance to this watch. Sometimes they're not labeled, but I did find out that if it was to be imported, they had to label it. And you could just tell right away if there's like a mismatch between that little piece and the rest of the movement. You could see that in this case, it was a match. You know, all these original parts together. So I'm really trying hard to put it all back together just the same. Here we go with the tight tolerances that I was talking about. We're just making sure that this mainspring is going to move. And I did do the mainspring off camera. To me, I like to make sure all the rest of the parts are away before I take out the spring on my desk. And I have a really small desk, so there's not a whole lot of room. But putting it back together is not easy. I have a really old winder that maybe I'll throw on like YouTube Shorts or something just to show you guys. And it's a pretty interesting process. At some point, I'm going to have to succumb to getting a nice winding set to do those mainsprings a little bit better. Just putting the center wheel bridge back in. And this is coming along pretty nicely. It's when all said and done, it's not a really hard build. You know, it's just a couple of screws and a lot more cap jewels than some other movements have. I know that there's probably other AS1187s that don't have this many jewels or cap jewels, possibly. But this is a feature of this watch apparently. And I know I got the wrong size screwdriver here, so I just switched it out. With this, I use a plastic tool to make sure it's nice and tight. We're putting on the spacer. And I'm not showing the oil on everything, but we are going over all the parts with HP 1300 or 9010 for a lot of this part. And don't forget that this, even though this is not labeled, this is a reverse screw. You know, putting in the escape wheel and the rest of the gear train over here. And you know, on YouTube, of course, seeing other people take apart watches and such. Weekend Watch Repair, he's a guy who always taps in the movement. I'm sorry, the bridge over here, and everything goes together. So I thought I'd try it out, and it's really funny how this all works out. Yeah, the second you see that escape wheel kind of moving, I mean, we got it first try. It's actually insane. So if you're having trouble with a train bridge over here, a train of wheels rather, and the bridge, you might want to try that. Might be a good tip. 3 screws hold this down. And now we're just gonna test and make sure that with power everything's alright. And here we go with the paddle fork. This is really tricky to show on camera, so I don't think I really get a good angle of it, but you're putting the absolute tiniest dot of oil on the pallet fork over there, and you're doing this a couple times, by the way. I like to get started and kind of cheat and get the first one on the pallet fork before I do it 2 more times while this is mounted, and it is just way too tedious to show you guys once it is mounted. But then we're just testing that the pallet fork is set correctly before we tighten this down. Give a spin to the ratchet wheel to make sure that there's power in there. And we're going to flip this over and work on the dial side. And I really can't tell if you can see in the video like the big X that was left on the mainspring barrel part at any part of this video actually. But it is funny. I mean, I did have to change out the mainspring just for good luck. And since I have a bunch of these movements, I did buy a couple because I know I'm going to do my grandma's watch at another time. And here we're just putting the world's most Molykote DX that you ever seen. Although I know I take this out, this crown, quite frequently and put it back in. So I think it's all good to do that, but you might want to put a little bit less. And we're just oiling everything on the top over here that's necessary. A little bit on this post. And a little bit of Molykote just for the center wheel. HP 1300 on there. We're putting the yoke in and the yoke spring. Again, you just don't want this flying, so I really like to position it so that it does not have the ability to. Sorry for the camera angles. As you could tell, both of them were kind of plugged up over there, but that's all right. It's all nice and in now. And we're just going to put this canyon pinion back on. HP 1300 on both those. And this transmission gear, you got to be careful. There's like a slope side and a non-slope side. The non-slope side goes up towards you. And I don't like to tighten these screws fully. I like to make sure that this is disengaged. And we will re-engage it after we put a little bit of Molykote in there. Bring that back down. And here we're just making sure that that it all works. Putting the bridge back in. And you know, I gotta tell you, it didn't fly up right away, but the fact that it turned over told me that it was just about the tight tolerances, that this would definitely run. Everything is in the right position. So I know it's lovely to see it go right away, but sometimes that's just not the case. Sometimes, you know, it just has to have the right clearances and everything like that. And here we go. Once it's tightened down with the screw, you can see it come to life. Not with crazy amplitude to begin off with, but we haven't oiled everything but those capsules that we did on the dial side. And so now we're just oiling the rest of the train here. And there's one more capsule for the escapement on this side with the world's tiniest screw. And I didn't know whether to put oil on the cap side of this or directly on the pivot, so I put a very, very tiny amount right on the pivot, and I thought that'd be all right. If you know better, you know, let me know. So when I do my grandma's watch and it has that same cap jewel, we don't mess up. And here, you know, I just took it off for a second. I just wanted to see if it improved any better from the beginning. Of course, there's no oil really dispersed throughout everything, but this is no adjustment, you know. I wasn't a time crunch, but that's pretty good for right off the bench, right after oiling it. 200 amplitude is still a little bit low. I'd really like to see 250, although I'm sure after like 2 days or so, it'll be right there. So we're putting the dial back on. Screwing the dial feet back in, and we're in the home stretch over here. We're just going to take these hands and put it down, and the great thing about no date or anything like that, super easy. Get the first hand on, then set it to 12, then get the second hand on. By that I mean minute hand. And then get the third hand on, which is the second hand. Really light press towards this, and I just love the way that this 3, 6, 9, 12 looks. We're just checking for clearances over here, and without throwing this back down on the pad, we're gonna take off the crown for the 19th time, and it's time to recase this already. And I say already, but this was probably about 4 hours in real life, so you guys are really getting the abridged version of this. Everything is obviously cut and some things are left out, but I want to get this done and upload it all within the same weekend. And so, of course, there's no time to let oils disperse and stuff like that. But after putting the back on, we're going to throw this on the time grapher again and see if it's any better than where we started. Man, look at this. It's just killer. Oof. Let's throw it on the time grapher. Way better. Way better. Thanks for joining me. And if you like this, tell your friends.